The Titans are moving into a new era of their franchise after overhauling a huge part of their offense. But unless Will Levis makes a massive leap in year 2, this offense is still going to struggle to put up fantasy points. We dig into the entire Titans offense and their 2024 fantasy outlook on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. The fantasy content is starting to be posted here for the preseason. Check it out there, sportingnews.com and NFL.com.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today, we're finishing up the AFC South. We're going through all 32 teams, giving them their own episode to talk through all of their fantasy outlook for this season. We're finishing up the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans. And then we only have one more division to go, the AFC East next week. And then we're like in the deep of like almost getting to fantasy draft season. So we're getting into a really exciting time here. Still have to finish up these teams, hitting on the Titans. Last year, not pretty season at all. 6-11, last place in the AFC South, ranked 27th in points per game, 28th in fantasy points per game as a team. They fired Mike Vrabel. They bring in an offensive-minded head coach and Brian Callahan coming from the Bengals. Also changed offensive coordinators. They let Ryan Tannehill leave. So this is now Will Levis's team for sure. They let Derrick Henry leave and then signed Tony Pollard like immediately in free agency the second they could talk to anybody. And then they paid up for Calvin Ridley to bring into the receiving room. They still have DeAndre Hopkins. They signed Tyler Boyd. The most interesting part of this team is likely the wide receivers for fantasy this year. So let's get into Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. So right now, Ridley's sitting as wide receiver 35 ADP with Hopkins right behind him at wide receiver 39. Not too big of a gap there between these two guys. What are your feelings? Who leads this team in targets this year?
Yeah, I think we're at the old fantasy cop-out, right? We're not quite sure, so we're going to rank them right next to each other. We think the newer guy that's coming in that's younger is going to be the key target, but DeAndre Hopkins still producing. So I don't know how this is going to really shake out in the end, but you think they did add Ridley and they were active to do that. And he was part of the new offense as well as Tyler Boyd, who does follow Callahan from the Bengals to be the slot guy here. So we've had like Nick Westbrook-Akine, Treylon Burks is still hanging around on this team. I would figure those guys slide into much lesser roles here with Ridley and Boyd there. Again, I think there's a lot to prove from Burks as a first-round pick. He has not panned out as a replacement literally in the draft for A.J. Brown. So they had to go out and get Ridley. He didn't really get too much interest to return with the Jaguars. It is interesting that Nick Foles, their new offensive coordinator, came from the Jaguars. So maybe the reason why Ridley signed there to maybe have a bigger impact on the field. So I'd say Ridley by default has to be the guy here, but we see his ranking. He's right at wide receiver 3 at the very bottom. And Hopkins is just a few spots behind him, right? So it's hard to tell how it's going to play out. I think there was an immediate chemistry between Levis and Hopkins, but Ridley comes in and he knows the offense a little bit better than Hopkins, and Hopkins is getting older, but Ridley is also older. So it is very hard to figure out. I think the key for Ridley is moving around a little bit, where I think DeAndre Hopkins already kind of does that. So I'm not saying I want to really target this receiving core much at all, Michelle, but if I had to go with someone, I think I go with Ridley because, again, he was the active move here for this offense versus Hopkins. I don't see both of them being real fantasy relevant yet. I mean, Will Levis would have to throw a ton and efficiently to make this happen. So I'm leaning slightly more toward Ridley, but I can't say I want to be excited and draft either higher than a wide receiver 3 in the top 36.
Yeah, I think both of their prices are fair, right? Because when you see who they're going around, like, the few guys going right before Calvin Ridley and Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed. Like, I much prefer McLaurin and Reed to Ridley. But then the guys after him, I think it's in a fair spot, right? It's Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Watson. Like, I do think this is a very fair price for them. They're risky. They have upside. We know that. We saw Calvin Ridley finish as a wide receiver 4 in 2020. Now, that was a long time ago since that happened, but we've seen his upside. Last year, he was a wide receiver 17 overall, wide receiver 26 in points per game. So you are getting a nice price on him this year if you do think he's going to lead the team in targets. Last year, went Hopkins at 137 targets. Chig Okonkwo was second on this team with 77 targets. Hopkins, I'm completely out on because he was so volume based last year that I can't jump on board. He averaged 8.8 points per game in half PPR in the 11 games. He had fewer than 10 targets. And that included his massive 32-point game because he had less than 10 targets in that game when he had 3 touchdowns. So that massive 32-point game is included in that 8.8 points per game. And the games with 10 plus targets, he averaged 15 points per game. That's awesome. But he's not going to get 10 plus targets when there's actually other weapons here now with Calvin Ridley, with Tyler Boyd. I just don't think he's going to have that type of value.
Yeah, and this is not a ton of vacated targets, by the way. It's 121, which is not an outrageous number. I mean, it's pretty low compared to some other things that we've had on other teams. So when I look at it, there's an opportunity for Ridley to eat up all those targets, right? And that would be it. And so that means there's not much wiggle room for Hopkins to see him bump up from what he's had, especially if they try to use Tyler Boyd a little bit more as a dedicated slot. And for some reason, they cannot quit Nick Westbrook-Akine. He just keeps coming back. I saw him out there on the practice field with he's just going to be there, I think forever. So we can have trouble pronouncing his name and figuring out what his role is going to be from year to year. But remember when he used to be the best option on this team, and now you got Hopkins and Ridley. You're trying to figure it out. So again, I take a shot on Ridley because I think he's got the potential for the touchdowns and can really do that. I mean, we've seen him have a big touchdown here with the Falcons. So there's that opportunity. I don't think he's kind of the profile of a number one. But a guy like Hopkins, who can line up everywhere, like we saw that value chart with Zay Jones when he was out in the field for the Jaguars, you saw Ridley being a lot more effective. So Hopkins can maybe draw that attention a little bit, create some opportunities for Ridley. So I do like that in terms of his thing. But I think it's what you see is what you get. You're not going to get, I don't think, any more than wide receiver 3. So it's not like you're getting a great value. You might be filling out a lineup spot pretty well here if that's your option for your third wide receiver and you feel really good about wide receiver 1 and 2. But again, we're not going to say, oh, he's suddenly going to have a wide receiver 2 ceiling. I mean, we already hyped him last year and he had a massive game. It's like, okay, he's rolling. First game, week 1 with Trevor Lawrence is going to be a big year. Then everything faded and he was very inconsistent. So I think Ridley's a limited receiver. He needs a lot of help. If you go back to Atlanta, who was on the field with him? Julio Jones. So he needs to be kind of number 2, playing off that number 1 to produce. And so that gives him a shot here. But again, his ceiling is capped and the floor of Hopkins is also capped.
Yeah. And if I'm choosing between one, it's going to be Ridley over Hopkins. They're too close in price to like worry about the price. I'd go with Ridley. I think you made a good point there. He gets to play next to Hopkins. Hopkins is going to be able to take away that coverage. That's a good point. We're going to get into their backfield now because they decided to let go of Derrick Henry, old man Derrick Henry. They're like, you know what? We're going to move on. So are they going to still lean on the run game like they have with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears? Are they going to be able to do that? It's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm excited to see it play out next year. We'll get to that right after we hear from a couple of our sponsors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to only U.S. customers.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by LinkedIn. There it is on our screen here, and they were our title sponsor as well, so we thank them for that. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Yeah, it's like operating a lot of businesses in the NFL, except we're smaller and tighter, and we need to find the right people at the right times to give us the help we need to take our business to the next level. LinkedIn is not going to give you just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actually searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role in a new environment. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional only on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resource to hire. And now you can join the 2.5 million small businesses that are using LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, let's dive into the Titans backfield. Bye-bye, Derrick Henry. This is just going to be weird not to have Derrick Henry in this backfield. He's headed to the Hall of Fame, but now he's going to put up his big numbers with the Ravens. Instead, they get into this carousel of free agent running backs on the move and land with Tony Pollard of the Cowboys here. Right now, his ADP is pretty low, 29, RB29, 90th overall on the board. Behind him, again, much like the Hopkins behind Ridley situation, Tyjae Spears is at ADP 34 among running backs, 102 overall. So very interesting. You had Tony Pollard still finished as an RB2 and a half point last year. Tyjae Spears finished as a clear kind of deep RB4 because of his limited role behind Henry. So there's the setup here, Michelle. What do you feel that this backfield is going to do, and where might you be leaning for the best value?
It's interesting because their new head coach, Brian Callahan, he's coming from the Bengals, and the Bengals gave Joe Mixon all the work, right? He had 70% of the team's rushing attempts in the span that Brian Callahan was with the Bengals as offensive coordinator. So it feels like he likes to go with one guy. And I do think Tony Pollard is going to lead this backfield unless he's just miserably bad and they have to change it up. I do think Tony Pollard's the lead. I think his price is pretty nice. I mean, running back 15 overall last year, running back 22 in points per game. It felt gross. It felt really bad because you drafted him so high. So now people are so off of him. But really, the biggest issue last year was the touchdowns. They weren't coming. When you're just comparing Pollard to Henry, they had almost identical scrimmage yards last year, very close in scrimmage touches as well. It's just the difference in the touchdowns. Henry scored 12 rushing touchdowns. Pollard only got in 6 times. So we know touchdowns can be fickle. They can go up and down. Now, I don't know how many scoring opportunities there will be for the Titans this year. And he's not Derrick Henry. Like, he doesn't have the body of Derrick Henry. So he's not going to be as efficient when he does get around the goal line. That's my biggest worry. But I think he's going to get a lot of touches. I mean, Tyjae Spears last year got 70 targets. And I don't know if he's going to get that anymore because Pollard's a good receiving back. Well, Derrick Henry, that wasn't his game. So I'm on Pollard's side here. And I know people want it to be Spears because it's more exciting, but I'm on the Pollard side.
Yeah, Spears was looking really good. Remember how we were excited about his role, and they went out and got Pollard, and like, oh no, what are they going to do here with this backfield? So we can still be excited by Spears. He's a good change of pace. He's going to be one of the better handcuffs in the league when he gets an opportunity to play it and be involved. It's going to be good, but I think it's probably going to be a 60% Pollard, and then Spears probably takes a chunk of the rest, and somebody else fills in like the backup. So when you look at that, I mean, Pollard, you bring up a great point, Michelle, with the use of Joe Mixon by Callahan, that he was the kind of lead, and then you had a little bit of Samaje Perine in passing situations, especially he would come in and have impact there. So you figure that split could definitely happen here because that's Spears' strength. He's a little bit younger than Perine, so he gives them a little bit of burst there when Pollard's on the field. But you're right, Pollard gives them some explosive running as well, and more so than an older Mixon would have here in this particular offense. So when I look at it, we also had Travis Etienne, right? He crosses over with Holes, the offense coordinator. He was quite the busy guy as well. So Pollard looks really good here in terms of the value. I mean, come on, we were drafting him as a top 10 running back last year, and he finished 15. So it was a little disappointing, but to drop him down to 29 is a little just overreacting, right? I know he's on a new team and they're going to open up the passing game, but we know the Bengals passed and there was room for Mixon as well. So I think Pollard is being undervalued. I think he should be taken probably as an RB2. I mean, his value is going to be pretty hot there. When you look at Jonathan Brooks, we're still waiting to see how that plays out there. He's going ahead. Javonte Williams right behind. I mean, there's question marks there. We know Raheem Mostert has got to worry about Devin Achane and the rookie Jalen Wright. You got Jalen Warren with Najee Harris, and then Zach Moss might be the preferred guy there over Pollard. But I think Moss and Pollard are in similar situations. Moss is the old Mixon in a way, and Pollard is the new Mixon. So you think those two guys stand out from their particular roles in the offense. And Spears, again, I think you're looking at change of pace, handcuff, and that's about it from Spears. I don't think he's going to have a lot of standalone value.
And the biggest worry about Pollard is this offense. How many scoring opportunities will you have? So that's the only reason you would leave Moss here, right? Because he's on a much better offense. But like the Jalen Warren over Tony Pollard, I expect Pollard to get so many more touches than Warren. And we're only 2 years removed now from we're 1 season removed from Pollard being one of the most efficient running backs in the league. Like he was electric. We have to remember he was also coming off a pretty devastating lower leg injury from the late in the season prior, got handed a huge workload. Maybe that's not really his role. I think Spears there will help him. Like we can see a really efficient Pollard again. They've done some work on their offensive line. The Titans have this offseason. So yeah, I think Pollard's a nice price. And when if your choices are getting to Pollard or Javonte Williams, like I'm taking Pollard over Javonte Williams every time.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what his role is. There's the easier path to his role. We can figure it out, the equation between what the Bengals offense was, what the Jaguars offense was, what the Titans are trying to do now, and all the things combined. So there's a kind of a path to see where Pollard was going to outperform his ADP and ranking. So I'm comfortable with that. And again, Spears is, again, at least we have somewhat of a clear-cut role. He's going to catch passes. He's going to be the guy in a pinch for maybe a short stretch when Pollard would have to miss time. So I like that definition of this backfield. And I think that's going to help fantasy managers know what to do with the Titans and the backfield on draft day.
I will say I'm not drafting Spears though, because there's still good running backs where he's going around, Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary, Trey Benson, Jerome Ford. Like I like all those guys more. Last year, he really didn't do anything except for a couple of games where he had a good amount of targets. I do expect those targets to go down with Pollard, also Ridley and Tyler Boyd there instead of just. So last year, Spears was third on this team in targets. I don't see that happening with all these weapons now. So Spears is mostly just a handcuff to me to Tony Pollard. And if Pollard gets hurt, he can be good. But going a little bit too early for me. We have to hit on Will Levis. I know we don't want to, right? We don't want to have this discussion, but we have to figure out he has a big arm, right? He's mobile enough. Can he have a breakout year in year 2? We're going to have to decide on that shortly here. I'll give you this break to think about it. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. What do you do when you get caught up wishing your life looked like someone else's? Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so you can start living your best life. I've personally benefited a ton from online therapy over the last few years. It's helped me learn positive coping skills and just how to set boundaries. It really has empowered me to be the best version of myself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress about it because you can switch therapists at any time for no additional cost. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Will Levis right now is actually going as quarterback 24 in ADP. So late, but I mean, he's still going ahead of guys like Derek Carr and Daniel Jones and Russell Wilson. So people are expecting him to have a better season than he did as a rookie, because as a rookie, he averaged only 11.3 points per game in starts. That was 27th among 32 quarterbacks with 8+ starts last year, only ahead of Bryce Young, Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett, and Ryan Tannehill, his teammate. So will he have a year two breakout? Are you excited about this new coaching staff with him? Like, could that make him be actually a solid late dart throw if you're in a 2-quarterback league?
Yeah, we're in our choose your adventure state here, where we have one path takes you to Joe Burrow with Will Levis. Another path takes you back to Kenny Pickett. And so we have to figure that out, right? I mean, Pickett was extremely hyped. Burrow came through on his hype there in year two. Pickett did not. He fell flat, and it ended with the Steelers wanting to move on from him. So that's a wide range of outcome. I'll say that's a fantasy buzzword once again with Will Levis, but it comes into play here again because he is a wild card. We don't know what we're going to get, but then again, we kind of know what we're going to get with Geno Smith, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, and we're not quite sure we're going to get with Russell Wilson and Bryce Young. So I want to know the players that have some upside. And can I point to some upside with Will Levis? Yes, we can, because the weapons with Ridley and Hopkins and Pollard, and we talked about even Okonkwo and Boyd and Westbrook-Ikhine on the team, and who knows what Burks will do. So there are some weapons here. This offensive line also added J.C. Latham and Lloyd Cushenberry, which are big pickups here. Cushenberry is a very good pass-blocking center. Latham's a rookie left tackle. You also have Peter Skoronski, the left guard. So this offensive line looking a lot better. So they can execute the passing game a little bit more downfield. The volume will be higher. It's not going to be the run-heavy offense that we saw with Derrick Henry. So there are variables that I can point to that say Will Levis can do it. It's much like Kenny Pickett, right? There are all these factors and things that we can think about that Kenny Pickett could have done it last year, including how he played in the preseason and what we saw. So I think Will Levis have to be very careful. I think it comes down to him, right? At this point, his mental capacity, his ability athletically, his arm strength, and just putting it all together. I mean, it comes down to all this with Will Levis. So it's not really about trusting the situation. Do you trust Will Levis, and do you believe in his talent?
He could be a garbage time type of guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I expect them to be losing a lot of games. I expect their defense not to be too great. They're going to be down. Maybe he pads some stats there in the fourth quarter because they're just trying to come back. I mean, he's going to have to score a lot of touchdowns because he's not really that rushing guy. He never had more than 25 rushing yards in any game last year. So it's going to have to come from touchdowns. I don't know if I trust his weapons all that much. Like, Hopkins is getting older. Ridley, he's so inconsistent. So can you picture Will Levis throwing 30 touchdowns next year? Like, I really can't. I think when you're looking at, like, you brought up Daniel Jones, I much rather go with Daniel Jones because at least you have the rushing floor. Like, he's going to rush.
Yeah.
He might lead the Giants in rushing yards this year. And he
Yeah.
probably leads the team in rushing touchdowns because it's only tiny little Devin Singletary there. So I would much rather go with Daniel Jones because he has the rushing floor and the same exact, I think, ceiling for passing, which isn't like a high ceiling, but like they're both big arm guys that aren't accurate. So, and also Jones got Malik Neighbors. Well, Will Levis, yeah, he got Calvin Ridley, but I'm taking Daniel Jones over Will Levis every time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Daniel Jones is a variable in himself. Seems like year to year. And again, his other question mark is the injury. How is that going to affect his running and all that? But again, you're talking about really deep picks here at quarterback. So I think I look at Levis and Bryce Young. That's going to be the interesting debate out of this group, right?
Yeah.
I mean, second-year quarterbacks, different systems, improved receiving cores, improved offensive line. Who just puts it all together? I mean, if you say based on their history in the SEC and who can get it done, you would say, oh, yeah, it's definitely Bryce Young with his mindset and all things, but maybe with the physical skill set in the NFL, maybe it's Will Levis. So I'm going to watch them carefully. I think in 2 QB leagues and Superflex, they're very good targets late because they have some upside, but I would also go and get somebody also like Derek Carr that is not exciting, but you know he's going to be out there. It doesn't have a lot of competition that you could play, and then you're hoping that either Young or Levis would outplay that player greatly, and you never have to put Carr in the lineup except for bye week. So when we look at that, I think there's some upside definitely with Will Levis, and I need to see a lot. because it's just not going to be the hype like we saw with Pickett. I need to like mentally wrap around that he's the real guy. So I'm going to be paying attention to a lot of reports here in Tennessee camp to make sure that we're just not hearing just the glossy stuff that we heard with Pickett that doesn't have a lot of substance behind it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Do you think there's any sneaky interest in grabbing Tyler Boyd or Treylon Burks late, or if you really punt on tight end, Chig Okonkwo? Okonkwo was second on this team in targets last year, but still did absolutely nothing for fantasy. He had one game with more than 7 fantasy points, and he was second on the team in targets, which you wouldn't expect this year. So I'm going to just throw him out. But really, I think the only question here is Tyler Boyd. He's had some good years. Treylon Burks, every year, he's going to break out, right? The coaches hype him up. Any hope for either of these two guys?
Yeah, I think I would lean toward Tyler Boyd because this guy's been a little bit underrated as a reality receiver. He just goes and gets the job done. He's available, produces, and he's produced well when there's no Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. When he was been the guy, he had some production. Even he's been a wide receiver 3 with the finish before. Now it's going to be hard for him to do that between Hopkins and Ridley, but he is a guy that carries over, that knows Brian Callahan the most out of this passing game. So when you look at that, he could be very valuable, right? If Will Levis is trying to get a little bit better with his accuracy and short to intermediate throws, he might be looking at Boyd a lot over the middle. And we know the history here of Callahan is interesting because he doesn't use the tight end, but Holes did a lot with Evan Ingram last year. So we want to see, I think one of these guys is going to emerge as the key third target. It's not going to be Treylon Burks. It's not going to be Westbrook-Ikhine. We're going to see in the middle of the field, is it Okonkwo? Is it Boyd? And one of them could have some value. Boyd is maybe a situational wide receiver 5. Okonkwo maybe in a 2 tight end league with some upside because he is still very talented, and maybe they'll untap it a little bit more in a team that's going to pass more with more passing smarts here and calling the plays.
Yeah, if you're in a 3 wide receiver league, really deep with those wide receivers, maybe consider Tyler Boyd. I mean, he's going so late, but I think he would need an injury to one of these top 2 guys to really do much. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers will be back next week to hit on the AFC East. So 3 extremely fun teams with the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins. And then, of course, we have to talk about the Patriots. But it'll be a fun time all week long. Don't miss those episodes. Bye, y'all.